There is a moment you've had. You know the one. You sent the second text, or the third. You explained yourself when no one asked you to. You laughed a little too hard at something that wasn't funny because the room felt cold and you needed it to be warm. And in that moment, a moment so small, you've probably already forgotten it, you handed someone a piece of yourself you will never get back. In 1502, one of the most brilliant diplomats in history walked into a room and did exactly what you did. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli. He'd been sent by the Florentine Republic to negotiate with a man who had systematically dismantled the political order of an entire region, Cesare Borgia, Duke of Valentinus. Machiavelli arrived with rehearsed leverage, logical arguments, weeks of preparation, but he had every reason to believe he'd walk away with what he came for. Borgia said almost nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't counter. He sat in a darkened room and watched. And Machiavelli, this brilliant, articulate man, started talking faster, filling gaps, offering concessions no one had asked for. By the end of that meeting, Machiavelli had given away more than he came to negotiate, and Borgia hadn't moved a muscle. Now here's what nobody tells you about that encounter. This was not a failure of intellect. It was a failure of neurology. Modern neuroscience has now confirmed what Borgia demonstrated with silence 5 centuries ago. The moment you enter a state of need, the moment you want something from someone who doesn't want anything from you, your brain physically changes. Your orbitofrontal cortex hyperactivates, obsessively valuing the other person's approval, and simultaneously, your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for strategy, composure, impulse regulation, and self-control, goes partially offline. You don't just look desperate, you become cognitively impaired. Neediness is not a vibe, it is a neurological handicap, and you are triggering it every single day. I'm going to show you 5 psychological mechanisms that make a person magnetically powerful. But the 5th one, the one that ties them all together, isn't a technique, it's a reckoning, and it will change how you see every relationship, every negotiation, and every moment of silence for the rest of your life. But here's what makes this worse. The scarcity that triggers this impairment doesn't just affect how others see you, but it affects how clearly you can see them and yourself. And the people who figured this out 5 centuries ago used it to control entire nations. Robert Cialdini documented something through decades of research on influence that should terrify you. The perceived value of anything, a product, a person, an opportunity, increases the moment it becomes harder to obtain. This is the scarcity principle. And most people think it applies to products on a shelf. It doesn't. It applies to you, your attention, your approval, your emotional availability. These are commodities, and they follow the exact same supply and demand mechanics as anything on a market. Every text you send first, every over-explanation of your worth, every "are we okay?" after a disagreement, that is an act of market flooding. That you are increasing the supply of yourself to the point where your presence costs nothing, and cheap things get discarded. Think about this. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, the advisors who survived were not the most talented. They were the ones who understood proximity as currency. They didn't crowd the prince. They positioned themselves at a distance that made the prince come to them. There was a courtier in the court of Ludovico Sforza, a skilled musician, a decent strategist. He made one fatal error. He was always there. Every feast, every council, every hunt. He volunteered for every task. I praised every decision. And within 2 years, Sforza couldn't remember his name. He had become furniture, not because he lacked skill, because he had eliminated dosage. He had made his presence so constant that it became invisible. But meanwhile, another man, far less talented, appeared only when summoned, spoke only when the room was stuck, left before anyone wanted him to. Sforza grew obsessed with him, started consulting him privately, gave him land. The difference was not skill, it was dosage. The first man gave everything. The second man made everything he gave feel rare. Now some of you are thinking, but I'm already alone. I'm already scarce, and it isn't working. I hear you. And this is the most important distinction in this entire framework. There are 2 kinds of scarcity: strategic scarcity, which is rooted in fullness and purpose, and circumstantial scarcity, which is rooted in isolation and emptiness. The market doesn't reward absence. It rewards the perception that your presence has genuine cost. And this is the difference between a luxury brand being exclusive and a failing store being empty. Same empty room, entirely different signal. But here's the twist that makes this even darker. When your brain is in that scarcity mode, when you're in the wanting state, not only does your strategic ability collapse, but your ability to read other people's emotions collapses too. Researchers found that the N1 amplitude, a marker of early empathic processing in the brain, is significantly reduced in individuals experiencing a scarcity mindset. What does that mean in plain language? It means the person who begs for approval is not only seen as lower status, they are cognitively unable to accurately read the social environment. They are blind to the very signals they need to navigate the relationship. This explains something that drives people insane. I've been doing everything right and it still doesn't work. It doesn't work because the scarcity mindset doesn't just change how others see you. It changes how accurately you see them. You misread warmth as interest. You misread politeness as investment. You chase signals that aren't there because your brain has lost the instrument that detects them. Mark Manson calls this non-neediness. He argues it's the single most important trait in any social dynamic, not confidence. Confidence can be faked, not charisma. Charisma can be performed, non-neediness. The absence of desperation, because it radiates from a place that is either full or empty, and people can feel the difference. So you understand economics now. You know you've been flooding the market. And the logical next step seems obvious. Withdraw, go silent, play hard to get. Except that approach has a catastrophic failure rate. And the reason why is something Cesare Borgia demonstrated with such precision that Machiavelli spent the rest of his life writing about it. Here's the thing, most people don't realize. There are 3 masks that people put on when they learn these principles, and every single one of them will destroy you. The first mask is a mystery. Your instinct right now is probably this: I'll just go quiet, I'll stop sharing, I'll be mysterious. And that instinct isn't wrong in theory. The neuroscience behind mystery is rock solid. There's a phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect. The human brain is wired to complete patterns. When something is left open, unresolved, partially revealed, your mind cannot let it go. It chews on it, returns to it, obsesses. Pair that with variable ratio reinforcement, the same mechanism that powers slot machines and social media algorithms, and you get this. Neuroimaging research shows that the gradual discovery of a cryptic individual produces roughly 72% higher dopamine release than interacting with someone who is predictable and fully known. Mystery is not pseudoscience. It is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. But here's where it breaks. Mystery curated from depth signals high status. Mystery performed from emptiness signals confusion, and people can feel the difference. Research on organizational psychology shows that when unpredictability in a leader is driven by internal instability rather than strategic curation, it doesn't create attraction. But it creates what researchers call follower strain. Increased anxiety, loss of trust, disengagement. The observer detects the frequency of fear beneath the silence. Cesare Borgia never revealed his full plan to anyone. He gave each advisor one piece of the board. But here's the critical qualifier. Borgia had a plan. The mystery was surplus, not deficit. At Senigallia, he lulled his treacherous commanders into a false sense of security through reconciliatory letters, dismissed his own French reinforcements, beamed graciously upon them, then gave the signal for their execution. His mystery was backed by the capacity for decisive action. Without that capacity, mystery is a bluff, and bluffs get called. The second mask is stoicism. I'll stop begging, I'll be strong, I'll refuse to show need. But the biology of rank doesn't care about your willpower. In studies on mice, researchers found that social rank is determined in the hippocampal prefrontal circuit before any interaction even begins. The decision to submit or stand ground is made at a subcortical level, below conscious control. The same thing happens in humans. Over-apologizing, qualification language, checking in. These are linguistic belly-up displays. And yes, you can suppress them through sheer willpower. You can stop saying sorry to bother you. But the body has its own vocabulary. The eyes darted, the voice wavers, the jaw clenches. Strain is just begging with better posture. Epictetus was born a slave. He had no wealth, no title, no social leverage. Yet the most powerful men in Rome sought his counsel. Why? Because his posture, even as a former slave, was not performed. It was structural. I have everything I need inside this mind. You may join me or you may leave. I will not adjust my orbit for you. That sentence cannot be rehearsed. It has to be true. And here is something that will change how you walk into every room for the rest of your life. Researchers studying dominance hierarchies discovered that humans signal rank before they even speak a full sentence. Not through volume, not through vocabulary, through vocal pitch. Individuals who raise their pitch early in an interaction, that slight uptick when you're nervous, when you're seeking approval, are perceived as lower status within seconds. But individuals whose pitch deepens over the course of a conversation are perceived as more formidable, more trustworthy, more worth following. This is not a metaphor. This is your larynx broadcasting your internal hierarchy to the room, and it cannot be consciously overridden for long because it's driven by the same subcortical circuits that process genuine self-belief. Epictetus didn't need a title because when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who had stopped asking for permission. Your body already knows whether you believe in yourself. The question is whether you're going to let it keep telling the truth. The third mask is friction. I'll make myself harder to access. I'll say no more. I'll create friction. And again, the mechanism behind this is real. In 1959, psychologists Elliot Aronson and Judson Mills ran a study that proved something counterintuitive. People who suffered to enter a group valued that group significantly more than people who were admitted for free. Same group, same experience, same people inside. But the ones who bled for entry treated it like sacred ground. This is the effort justification effect, and it's confirmed at every level of society. Limited editions sell out. Exclusive clubs thrive. Restaurants with 2-month waiting lists get reviewed by every food critic in the country. But here's the paradox that nobody talks about. Research on professional networking found that many low-power individuals already avoid social engagement because it feels dirty, manipulative, beneath them. And that avoidance is exactly what keeps them powerless. The mystery of the high-status individual and the withdrawal of the socially anxious person look identical from the outside, but they produce opposite results. There was a tailor in Milan during the 16th century. He wasn't the most skilled artisan in Italy. At least 3 others had finer stitching, but he maintained a 6-month waiting list. He once told a duke that his order would have to wait behind a merchant's because the merchant had been patient. Word spread, not about his skill, about his standards. And suddenly, every nobleman in Lombardy wanted to wear his work, not because the fabric was better, because being dressed by him meant you had earned it. The friction was the product, but that friction came from a genuine principle. Patience earns priority. If friction comes from anxiety, avoidance, or a fear of rejection masked as standards, people detect insincerity. So, here's the answer to a question that keeps coming up. Where is the line between strategic withdrawal and avoidant isolation? Strategic friction comes from a life so purposeful that diversion carries real cost. Avoidant isolation comes from a life so empty that engagement carries real terror. The external behavior is identical. The internal architecture is opposite. Every technique I've shown you is real. Every mechanism is backed by neuroscience and centuries of historical proof. But they are all skins stretched over a skeleton. And if the skeleton is broken, the skin tears the moment someone touches it. I've watched people learn every single one of these principles and still fail, spectacularly, repeatedly, and for a long time, I couldn't figure out why. Until I found the 5th mechanism. And it's not a technique, it's a reckoning. Every time you said yes when your gut screamed no. Every time you laughed at a joke that demeaned you. Every time you stayed in a room, a relationship, a job, a friendship that was slowly hollowing you out because leaving felt harder than shrinking. Every time you abandon your own standards to keep someone else comfortable. Those moments did not just cost you peace, they cost you presence. They fractured something at the core of your identity, the quiet internal knowledge that you can trust yourself. And without that self-trust, every technique becomes desperation, wearing a better suit. Robert Greene calls this the law of compulsive behavior. He argues that people are driven by deep, repetitive patterns that are often invisible to themselves, but manifest across every domain of their life. The man who begs in relationships will beg in business, while the woman who abandons herself for approval at work will abandon herself for approval at home. The pattern is the person, and until you confront the pattern, no strategy will save you. Here's the counterintuitive truth that ties all of this together. The most powerful people in history did not become powerful by withdrawing. They became powerful by being destroyed first, and then refusing to stay broken. In animal dominance research, repeated defeat creates something called the loser effect. The brain defaults to submission. The dorsomedial striatum encodes "I lose" as identity. This is why some people always feel powerless. Their neural architecture has been patterned by cumulative self-betrayal. But in humans, and this is the critical distinction, conscious reckoning with defeat activates entirely different pathways. The cholinergic interneurons fire. Behavioral flexibility unlocks. The brain rewires, not despite the defeat, but through it. You don't choose to stop needing. You get broken out of needing. Machiavelli is the proof. In 1512, he was stripped of his title, tortured on the Strappado, and exiled from Florence. He didn't beg for reinstatement. He didn't send desperate letters. He didn't offer concessions to the men who destroyed him. He spent his mornings in the woods and his evenings in his study. And in that exile, that period of total loss, he wrote The Prince, a book that would outlive every single man who had rejected him. That was not technique. That identity was rebuilt from the inside until the power was structural, until it was bone, until it could not be removed because it was no longer a posture, it was him. Now here's something that should stop you cold. When you achieve that level of genuine structural presence, you don't just attract people. You trigger something in their nervous system that researchers call the awestruck effect. Followers in the presence of a leader with authentic magnetic power don't just admire them. They physiologically suppress their own emotional expressions. The leader gains a monopoly on the room's emotional climate. This isn't a metaphor. This is a measurable neurophysiological response. Borgia's silence didn't just make Machiavelli talk more by choice. It made Machiavelli's nervous system unable to be quiet. The dominant presence didn't merely attract attention. It inhibited the observer's own self-expression. That's the mechanism behind "there's something about him. I can't explain it, but I trust him." It's not charisma. It's neurophysiological dominance. And it cannot be faked because the body detects the difference between tonic dopamine, the low, steady baseline of confidence found in high-status individuals, and phasic dopamine, the reactive, impulsive spikes of someone who is constantly checking, refreshing, seeking reassurance. The neurochemical signature of power is not intensity, it is steadiness. And steadiness is built by reckoning, not rehearsal. So here's the uncomfortable work. You must audit your betrayals, not the betrayals others committed against you. Those are easy to catalog. The ones you committed against yourself. The times you knew you should have walked away but stayed. The moments you dimmed yourself so someone else could feel bright. And the promises you made to your own soul and broke before breakfast. Write them down if you have to, not to punish yourself, but to see the pattern. Because once you see it, you can interrupt it. And once you interrupt it, you stop leaking the quiet signal that tells the world this person does not fully believe in their own worth. That signal, invisible, unspoken, radiating from every pore, is the reason techniques fail for most people. They are broadcasting unworthiness underneath a performance of strength. And human beings, at a subconscious level, can always detect the frequency beneath the words. But knowing the architecture and living inside it are two different things. And there is one final question that separates the people who watch videos about power from the people who actually possess it. Yet you now have the architecture, scarcity that comes from genuine fullness, not manufactured absence. Mystery that comes from depth, not deception. Posture that comes from self-respect, not ego. Friction that comes from real standards, not games. And the foundation, the brutal, quiet work of ending your war with yourself. Here are the 4 shifts that change everything. You do not need their approval. You prefer it. You do not need the job. You are evaluating whether it deserves your years. You do not need the relationship. You are choosing whether this person earns access to your life. You do not need the room to validate what you already know about yourself. The shift is subtle, but the effect is seismic. Because when you stop needing, you stop leaking power. And when you stop leaking power, people start noticing a gravity about you they cannot explain. They'll call it confidence. They'll call it charisma. But it's simpler than that. It's the posture of a person who has stopped asking the world for permission to exist. Now, some of you are thinking, this only works if you already have something. Machiavelli had intellect. Borgia had an army. What about people who have nothing? And I hear that. But consider Epictetus, born a slave, no wealth, no title, no social capital whatsoever, and yet the most powerful men in Rome sought his counsel. Because the minimum viable position for these principles is not wealth, it is not status, it is not connection, it is internal sufficiency. The absence of the belief that you need someone else to complete you. That position is available to anyone. It costs nothing to acquire, while it costs everything to maintain. And that is precisely what makes it valuable. But I need to warn you about something. The moment you use these mechanisms as weapons of manipulation, the moment you perform scarcity to punish, or engineer friction to control, or weaponize mystery to torture, you have collapsed back into neediness. Because manipulation is the most desperate act of all. It screams, I cannot get what I want through honest means. And the room will detect it. Power is a state. Manipulation is a strategy. The powerful person does not need to manipulate because their presence alone restructures the dynamic. The manipulator needs to manipulate because, without technique, they have nothing. The version of you that stops begging, that stops chasing, that stops performing, that version already exists. No, you felt him in flashes. In those rare moments when you said no and meant it. When you walked away from something comfortable because it was slowly killing you. When you sat in silence and realized the silence was not emptiness. It was sufficiency. He is not someone you need to build. He is someone you need to stop burying. And the question that will haunt you tonight, if you let it, is this. What are you still performing? And for whose applause? That feeling, that discomfort, that's not weakness. That's the sound of something real trying to get through the performance. If what you felt watching this was recognition, not just interest, recognition, then what lives behind the join button was built for exactly this moment. It is the material I can't say here. The frameworks that cross lines the algorithm punishes. But the information that actually shifts how people treat you doesn't survive in public. Most people will scroll past. That's the filter working exactly as it should. Tactics are borrowed. Identity is built. And once built, it does not require maintenance. It simply is.